Hey everyone, welcome to the Orange and Black Insider, the podcast for Bengals fans and the Houday Nation faithful. I am Anthony Cosenza. We will be joined later in the program by our another regular co-host, Connor Howe. But for the meantime, I am joined by Scott Schulze. And Scott, normally I kind of just do the casual, how you doing and what's new in your life. This week, because this has kind of been a theme over the past month or so, we've talked about you. We've talked about you and your Twitter account. And instead of you creating one at the prompting of myself and other viewers and all of that, you actually already have one that not many people knew about, maybe even yourself. So I'm going to let you publicize your Twitter account because now your content is going to be put out there, and I would assume that the Orange and Black Insider content will also be put out there. So what is your Twitter handle? How can people follow you?
First I'll explain. I actually got it because of the podcast. You and Connor gave me a lot of grief so early, I think, in our series. I created it, and then I forgot all about it. So last week, after getting more grief, I decided to create one and realized, apparently I created one 4 months ago and just forgot all about it. So I think it is, I don't know if there's what kind of symbol, but it's Smackabees, SMACKABEES. And I don't know if there's any dots or anything. It comes I don't know if it's like at Smackabees. Yes.
Okay. All right. So it's official. Scott Schulze's on Twitter.
Yeah.
You can get his material not just on Cincy Jungle and not just while we talk about it on this show. You can get it on Twitter. So follow him at Smackabees. I don't know if we want to talk about what that's about, but at Smackabees is the Twitter handle. And I got to give you credit, Scott. You have, despite a few technical issues that you've had over the past couple of weeks, you have still joined us in one capacity or another. Be it audio only, video only, and now this week you're using a tablet. So kudos to you. Appreciate you still coming on and fighting through some of those issues. And I know we're going to get everything resolved and continue to see your lovely face, hooded sweatshirt or not.
Yeah, it's very Sith mode today. But because of the weather. We have some really lousy weather in Ohio right now.
Yeah, you are a little dark.
Yeah, I think I've done laptop, desktop, tablet. Eventually, I need to get on this with my with our old CRT.
Well, you are a little Darth Sidious-like, even though it's an orange sweatshirt. I do like the look here. Again, this is the Orange and Black Insider. Anthony Cosenza here. Scott Schulze. We are live at Cincy Jungle via the SB Nation Network and on our YouTube channel. We will be taking questions in either the comment threads there at Cincy Jungle or on our YouTube chat and even on our Twitter account at Bengals OBI. Leave us a question. We're going to get to fan questions, we hope, at the end of the program, as we try and do almost every week. So appreciate the feedback there. We are available on iTunes, on YouTube, on SoundCloud for all of our downloading at Cincy Jungle. You can catch all of our stuff. You can get in touch with us, as I mentioned, on Twitter at Bengals OBI and via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. Please check us out and get in touch with us. We appreciate it. Scott, let's kick it off with something that you have kind of been specializing in over the past few weeks. For those who have paid attention to Cincy Jungle, you have made a number of different posts on prospective running back prospects coming out in this draft, and many of which who have been linked to the Bengals. Now, last week's program, we talked to Joe Goodberry, a draft guru. If you didn't check out that interview, we have it segmented aside from the actual show itself, so please check that out. But Scott, you've done, I believe so far, Leonard Fournette of LSU, Alvin Kamara of Tennessee, Joe Mixon, to the chagrin of some people, based on that guy's history. You've kind of broken him down, and a few others that are kind of in that round 1, round 2 range for the Bengals. Now, I don't know exactly where you want to start, but maybe talk about the pros and cons of some of these guys and who you feel could be the good fits based on your film study, kind of based on what Joe Goodberry said last week, who are kind of some of your favorites? I know you like Joe Mixon's skill set, but it's the guy that a lot of people don't like, obviously.
Yeah, he's him and Fournette Butts can be very polarizing on the Cincy Jungle website. The engineer side of me is kind of drives me to not want to say anything without having a lot of data. So as you mentioned, some of those posts that were mentioned about running backs, it could be potential Bengals targets. So basically watched a lot of video of all the different running backs who have been posted so far. And as Joe Goodberry mentioned last week, NFLDraftScout.com is invaluable for that. So if you have the interest, that is definitely a site worth checking out. So what I did was went to watch basically a handful of game videos of all the different running backs, watched each play kind of several times over, tried to get a feel basically for what are the things these guys do good, what are the things they do bad. And having watched all of them basically in succession over a couple weeks, you really get to see trends, and you kind of get to comparatively look at the different players. This guy does this thing really good, and this guy doesn't. Basically, after all that, that led to some of those posts, and hopefully, time permitting, God willing, there's more coming after that. So what I thought I would do is just kind of highlight some of the 4, 5, 6 guys who tend to be popular targets in round 1, round 2 on mock drafts, either for the Bengals or other teams. Slide past our teams, they could end up on the Bengals. So basically just kind of highlighting those players. What are some pros and cons, and how would they fit if they were a Bengal? So I'll start with Leonard Fournette because he tends to be the top pick on many analysts as far as the media experts are concerned. He tends to be the top running back. Actual scouts, actual rumors you hear tend to be not as high on him. I mean, they tend to say he's good, but not to the level that your media folks are. And he's someone who has been popularly mocked to the Bengals at number 9, and if not to them, even before that. So if you watch a lot of video on him, there's definitely some good things you see, and you realize why he's that high. He has a lot of game speed. He's someone who isn't just a 40 guy, but actually runs away from defensive backs. And when you're, 220, 230, well, I guess 240 pounds at the combine, 225 at his pro day. So whatever weight he wants to play at, he's definitely carrying a lot of weight and running very well with it. If you're running away from cornerbacks and safeties, you've got speed. And on a lot of these plays, he tends to get ahead of steam, opens up, he gets a nice running lane and runs free. So the one thing you kind of see with him is he gets a lot of blocking when he does that. They have a big offensive line. He gets a clean lane. A lot of his highlight plays where he gets, rips off 50, 60 yards, he's basically untouched. And unfortunately, that's not always going to happen in the NFL. So I'd say that's definitely the pro. He is a highlight machine. He has the speed to run away from people. He has power. Most of his power tends to be against defensive backs. A lot of his highlight reels are him, blowing up little freshman cornerbacks who are maybe, 50 pounds less than him. You don't see him do that so much with linebackers or defensive linemen. The negative is he likes to run to contact, and he played this year with a list of different injuries with his ankle and knee, and just eventually sidelined his season. He came back middle of the year, wasn't nearly as effective, had like a 3.8 yards per carry, struggled to eventually shut him down for the season. You have to hope he's healthy. I mean, obviously, if you look at his 40 times, you could argue he's healthy. But he does have a lot of usage on him. And the one negative, because he runs to contact and has an injury history, he's not very elusive. A lot of his highlights, you don't really see him making guys miss. It's basically, I'm just going to run fast and run through you. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. On the Bengals, with that line, it just doesn't seem to be a great fit. I just picture him running into the back of Russell Bodine way too frequently, or whatever our makeshift line's going to be. I mean, he's a good player. I just don't know how good of a fit he would be on the Bengals team. Is not going to give him a lot of clean lanes that he really needs to make things happen. So he's someone's going to get you, probably on the Bengals, he'll probably get 0, 2 yards, 0, 3, -2, -1, 0. And if you're lucky, maybe throw in like a 30 and then back to the 0, 2, which I don't think is really what they need. I don't know if they would take him. I mean, if they would, I think he's essentially going to be a faster version of Jeremy Hill with maybe slightly better vision. Me personally, I wouldn't say he's a great fit. A guy who I would say is a great fit is someone like Joe Mixon, who, I've obviously mentioned him, I think, every podcast last month. So I'm trying not to go too deep on him. Just he does seem to have the power, speed, escapability, and can play receiver. He has a lot of positives. A lot of people talk about, as far as on-field talent, he's number one. Off-field, that's obviously the red flag, and it's where you want to put the character issues. That's obviously his biggest knock. If he was on the Bengals, I think he could legitimately be a 3-down back, which might be a direction this team would want to take, given the fact they lost Burkhead, Giovanni Bernard's coming back from major injury, and Jeremy Hill has struggled for 2.5 of the last 3 years. So I think he would probably be the best fit if they want to go with a true 3-down back, like the Steelers have in Le'Veon Bell, a guy that you're just going to give the ball to, he's going to carry the load. Outside of those two, you have a couple other interesting prospects. You have Dalvin Cook from Florida State and Christian McCaffrey from Stanford, who are kind of similar. They're more of the Giovanni Bernard types, in that they are usually they're more like your third down. They're built like your third down backs in that 200, 210-pound range. They have decent speed. They have a lot of that shifty elusiveness that you like with guys like Bernard. So they have that going for them. They're not really power guys. You watch a lot of their plays. You see the one thing they struggle to do is they don't move a pile. They don't really get those yards after contact like the first two guys do. So if the Bengals were to get them, they'd probably still stay with someone like Hill, which I think would probably frustrate a lot of fans, because I think fans would prefer to see Hill replaced over Bernard if they had their choice. So I don't see the Bengals really pursuing either of them unless it's a situation where they're a second-round best player available kind of pick, just because of the issue of the guy they're replacing is, you could argue is the better of the two Bengals running backs. McCaffrey's a great receiver. They both have some shiftiness. So, yes, they kind of fall in that same mold. And then the last guy, who's kind of an interesting prospect, is Alvin Kamara from Tennessee. And it's kind of an interesting guy because he was in Alabama for a year, so he was a very highly regarded player, obviously, to be an Alabama recruit. And then after that, he ended up with I think he left the program because he didn't get any playing time. He went the JUCO route, ended up back in the SEC for Tennessee, was a backup for a year and a half. The starter left the program. So he's only really been a starter for half a season. And in that, you watch those games and you see why people are so high on him despite playing time, because he has some amazing balance, elusiveness, vision, can catch the ball. Things that he does when he has the ball in his hands are pretty amazing. The thing you worry about with him is, does he have the size to be a 3-down back? Sorry, he doesn't have the, the training or the resume for it. He's not really a big power back. He's kind of like maybe a slightly bigger Giovanni Bernard, who's obviously healthier, has very little wear and tear on him. And I think that's one of the challenges you run into with all the top running backs, other than those first two I mentioned, Mixon and Fournette, is they all seem to be guys who, if they were on the Bengals, would be platooning. They'd be replacing Bernard, and the Bengals would probably still be running Hill up there on first down, second down, and short yardage, which I think would frustrate a lot of Bengals fans. So I'm not quite sure how those running backs would fit, other than the first two, which I think is why the first two tend to get mocked to the Bengals the most, because the idea is Hill seems to be the one they want to replace. So then it just brings the question: do you grab Fournette in the first, given that he's not a perfect candidate, or do you wait and hope Mixon falls to you in the second, or do you do something the Bengals don't do very often, trade? You trade back into later first or trade up into the early second, trying to get Mixon. So I think when it's all said and done, there's not really a guy you look at and you're like, wow, this is a great fit for the Bengals, but there's definitely some interesting possibilities.
Most definitely. And, you look at it and you say, okay, Fournette's kind of more of the thumper. And when I look at Fournette, I kind of see it's always the LSU Alabama thing. And it's because they've built such great programs. But you look at it and you go, okay, is he kind of a Derrick Henry guy? And granted, Derrick Henry ran a lot better than people thought he would at the combine. And he had an outstanding preseason, did some things in the regular season, took a back seat as a number 2 back to with the Titans there. But kind of that big bruiser, straight line, one cut guy. I like you. Is he a guy that creates without the blocking, or is he a guy that needs the blocking and is going to have an outstanding career? It kind of depends. You might be looking at more of an Eddie George type of player, which, if you remember Eddie George's career, that's not a bad thing. Mixon, we know the issues. I'll get back to him in a minute, but Kamara is a guy that intrigues me because he just hasn't had the touches. You look at him at Tennessee. You mentioned, Scott, that he transferred 13 games with Tennessee in 2015, 107 carries, 698 yards rushing, 6.5 yards a carry, 7 touchdowns. Now, the thing that intrigues me the most is the 74 receptions in 2 years as a running back with 683 yards, a 9.2 average yards per catch, and 7 receiving touchdowns. Now, to me, the Bengals need a dynamic threat like that on offense, especially because last year you saw that defenses towards the end of the year when A.J. Green was out of the lineup, Tyler Eifert was out of the lineup, they didn't really respect much that the Bengals were showing them on offense. My thing is, and this kind of goes back to Mixon, my thing is the Bengals have Jeremy Hill, who's kind of their thumper back, if you will, maybe plays 1 or 2 downs. You have Giovanni Bernard, who's you don't want to say just a third down back because he's much more than that, but at the same time, he has had the injuries. As a smaller guy, you worry about giving him 300-plus carries a year, and then the amount of catches he receives a year as well in terms of a beating. You look at it, and you hearkened back to Le'Veon Bell with Joe Mixon. In terms of overall skill set, in terms of an overall 3-down back, I mean, I hate to say it because I don't really like what the guy has done in his past, but he kind of seems like the guy of all of these guys that seems to be a guy that could be the 3-down, every down guy out of all of them. Now, you reviewed the film of all of these guys, Scott. Do you think that that's a fair assessment based on what you've seen from those high-profile guys?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think one thing that a lot of people may not be considering, if you look at the history of Marvin Lewis, he tends not to prefer the smaller, elusive guys. And I think most Bengals fans would say, if you look at Giovanni Bernard's first year, he clearly outplayed Ben Jarvis Green Ellis. Yet Ben Jarvis Green Ellis got more carries. You look at years before that, when we had guys like Kenny Watson, D.D. Dorsey, Bernard Scott, who had their moments when preseason and when they seemed to get in games. They seemed to do well, but they just didn't get a lot of carries. Instead, he preferred to go with your plotting guys, your Cedric Benson, your folks like that, who just, that's just his guy he likes. And even, last few years when they've had Hill and Bernard, they do the same thing. Outside of that half season that Hill had his rookie year, Bernard has generally been the better running back, but yet Hill's the one who's getting starts, getting all the touches on first down, second down. And I think that's the one scary thing is, let's say, we do draft a guy like who's not that big 225 kind of guy. And I think, which means if they got a guy like McCaffrey or Cook, I just don't see them getting the usage. I think that's, for whatever reason, Marvin doesn't seem to be the coach that wants to give them enough touches to warrant it. I mean, we saw the same thing with Burkhead. He never played. He finally plays. You're like, wow, this guy's really good. Why aren't we playing this guy? Kamara could be the one exception only because he is a little bigger. I think is around 215 or so. So I think he might possibly be big enough for Marvin Lewis to say, yeah, if we don't get Mixon or Fournette, he's someone I could possibly see using. but I think he just has in his mind that, I want my running backs to be bigger. And then we've seen the same thing with, defensive linemen. I want my defensive ends, I don't want them to be 250. I want them to be 290. I want my linebackers like Ray Maluga to be 250, 260. Even if he's slow as a rock, that's, for whatever reason, he tends to put size over speed at certain positions, and running back seems to be one of them. So I think unless it's Fournette or Mixon and possibly Kamara, I don't know if the other prospects really have the size that would allow him in his mind to use them enough to warrant drafting them.
So real quick, I don't know how much studying you've done on McCaffrey. It seems to a lot of scouts, Christian McCaffrey has the every down skill set, especially in the receiving game. And I mean, if you see him run wheel routes and he has cuts that rival some of the better wide receivers in the game right now. I mean, it's unbelievable how he runs routes. Obviously was very productive as a running back and even did some returning at Stanford. But what's turning everybody off is, a guy that normally could be a top 10 pick should be rivaling names like Mixon and Fournette and, these guys that are up there in terms of skill set is his size. He's a little undersized, right around 200 pounds. He's actually built a little bit like Giovanni Bernard, 5'10-ish, 200-ish pounds, and has that skill set. Now, is that something you noticed and knocked on him? Or is it something where you say, you know what, the guy I don't have it in front of me, but had a massive amount of touches at Stanford, didn't get hurt, was a 2-year guy that was talked about as a Heisman guy. What do you think about him?
Yeah, when I saw him, the guy he reminds me of is someone like Darren Sproles or Danny Woodhead.
Yeah, that's good.
Where he's a great receiver. He kind of has that same kind of skill set. If you're a team that you want to throw 50, 60, 70 times to your running back on these little slants, quick passes, swing routes, screens, he is a perfect running back for that. The guy that you might give 5-10 carries a game and you throw a ton to. I don't know if the Bengals are that team, but if you're a team like the Patriots, I could see the Saints doing that. The Chargers obviously did that a lot when they had Woodhead there. I think there are certain teams that he fits perfectly to what they want to do. And I would assume he's going to go to one of those teams. If he goes to a different team, I'm assuming they're just going to underutilize him or not utilize him correctly, and then he may be considered a bust only because he doesn't end up in the right system. I mean, I could see him being a third down back, or a 3-down back, but I think his best fit is definitely a team that wants to throw often a lot of those short little dump-off passes that he would be a perfect guy for. Because when he's in the open field, he's very elusive and shifty. He likes very good at bouncing off tacklers. He has good vision. He can find the lane. He can bounce back, and he's not going to overpower you, but he's kind of like water. He's going to find the path of least resistance and take it. So I think he has a chance to be very good, especially if you want to throw the ball.
Yeah, it depends on the offense. That's a great call, and I think if you look at we're talking about the big bruiser backs, you're talking about maybe a 3-down guy in Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, the not so much college tape, but really, really high ceiling type of guy. And then you've got McCaffrey, and I think in terms of quick feet, in terms of shiftiness, he's got good speed as well, but I think his feet are incredible. And I think in terms of quickness of his feet, it's some of the quickest feet I've seen out of a running back in quite some time. And I think, if utilized correctly, and that's the key, and we all know that the Bengals sometimes aren't the best at doing that. I think if utilized correctly in the right system, he could be a very, very good prospect. Now, I'm glad you brought up the Patriots. I'm glad you brought up Rex Burkhead and all of that, because I want to talk about, when we're talking about running backs, I want to talk about the value of a running back in today's NFL. Now, sometimes for the past couple of years, people are saying, you can get a good running back in the 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds and start him. Other folks say, if there's a franchise changing back in the 1st or 2nd round, you got to pounce, regardless of the pass happy NFL in today's landscape. there are a couple. When you look at some of the better franchises last year, the Falcons. You look at the Super Bowl. Okay, the Falcons have Devontae Freeman. Very good back. They got him in the middle rounds. James White of the Patriots was a middle round guy. Teams get players that can contribute to their system in the middle rounds and be a good, productive back for them. Now, it seems that the Bengals are trying to decide whether they want to be a running back by committee type of thing, or let's give it to a workhorse guy and maybe supplement that with some carries and catches here and there on third down. It's yet to be seen what they kind of think about that as they go into this draft. But one guy that particularly intrigues me, Scott, especially for those of you in Ohio, is Kareem Hunt, the running back out of Toledo. The guy just has now. Granted, he didn't have he didn't play against the best competition, but the guy was a multi-dimensional back. The guy put up a crazy amount of stats. You look at his sophomore year at Toledo, 205 carries, 1,631 yards, 8 yards a carry, 16 rushing touchdowns that year. And then he really kind of came into his own as a senior last year, especially when you factor in the receiving aspect. 1,475 yards, 10 touchdowns on the ground, 41 catches, 403 yards, and a touchdown through the air. I'm kind of curious about some of these mid to late round guys. Anyone that struck your eye, and or in your assessment of these big name star-studded running backs that you see in this group this year. If you kind of say, you know what, maybe the Bengals go wide receiver, offensive line, defensive end, linebacker in those first handful of picks, and hold off on running back. Maybe Giovanni Bernard's going to be fine. Maybe Jeremy Hill's going to have a bounce back year and a contract year. What do you think, Scott?
Well, first off, I want to say I think you really nailed it with the Bengals not always utilizing players correctly. I think we've seen that many times on offense.
All over the place, offense and defense, yeah.
But some names that came to mind right away were guys like Chase Kaufman, who they drafted, who can do one thing really well in college, which is I can't block, but I can catch as a tight end. And what do? We're going to make you a blocking tight end. Or Orson Charles, guy who's a tight end. Hey, we're going to move you to fullback, and we just, all you have to do is block. Of course, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But that being said, one guy who I kind of liked as a mid-round prospect, who I think is kind of under the radar only because there are so many decent running backs this year in the draft, is Delta Foreman from Texas. And interestingly, he wasn't a super high recruit. He didn't really get a lot of playing time until this year. But when you watch him play, just the one thing that comes to mind is power. I mean, he's everything you want Jeremy Hill to be. I mean, obviously you want Jeremy Hill to be, Adrian Peterson and Jim Brown, but realistically, what you want Jeremy Hill to be is a guy that can run a first, second down, can plow through people, can get tough yards, isn't going to make mistakes. When you watch Foreman, you basically see what you want in Hill. He's not going to, win a foot race. He's not Fournette or one of these elite speedster guys. He is not. Unfortunately, he has some of the fumble issues that Hill has. He doesn't really give you anything in the receiving game. But if you want a guy who's just going to rumble and plow through people, kind of like a Mike Allstott, that when he gets the ball, you expect to hear this, this soundtrack of like boom, 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 like rock.
Chris Berman, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of the things that comes to mind, because there are a lot of plays where you see he just drags guys. His yards after carry is ridiculous. But because of all these other names we've mentioned, he's someone that probably isn't going till, I don't know, maybe the third, fourth, fifth round because of all these other names, and he doesn't have the elite speed. He really didn't start till this year, so I think he might be a guy who's kind of overlooked. And if the Bengals, if they truly want to move on from Jeremy Hill, get someone who's younger, who you figure Hill's probably going after this year, so he's a younger version of Hill. He seems to have a little better as far as the power and the vision goes. instead of grabbing a guy in round 1 or 2, why not wait until the like 4th, 5th round to see if you can get someone who possibly could reprise that role. And we know it's a role they value because they always seem to give those bigger backs, whether it be Rudy Johnson or Benson or Law Firm, they always seem to get their carries. So he's definitely someone that, if I was going to pick someone out of a hat who I could see the Bengals using a mid-late round pick, one of those guys that falls, and you're like, wow, someone like Westerman last year, the lineman, who is, if Foreman's still there and they haven't drafted a running back, I'd say he's probably one I could see them going after.
Yeah, this year, whether it's running back or other positions, it's tough to tell what the Bengals might do because, you look at it and you say, okay, they're entrenched at starters in a lot of spots, especially on offense. But the starters that are entrenched in some of those spots could very well use some upgrading, whether it's the second wide receiver at opposite A.J. Green. I mean, Brandon LaFell had a nice year last year and signed a much higher contract than he did last year. Still not a giant contract, but you look at it and you go, okay, if the Bengals are going to draft a wide receiver in the first couple rounds, which a lot of people think they might, is that someone who's going to supplant Brandon LaFell right away with his decent contract? You look at running back. You have 2 second-round picks there. They did lose Rex Burkhead, but brought back Cedric Pierman. So, especially if the Bengals go mid-rounds, late rounds at running back, you would think then, obviously, Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill have the reins again. It's just kind of an interesting year for the Bengals. You're coming off a 6-win season after 5 straight playoff seasons, and you want to improve the team, but you kind of say, well, if we're going to improve the team, that means some of these starters that have been either relatively productive, pretty productive, or maybe they just had a dip in production last year are going to probably take a back seat to some of these young guys. And, who knows how much playing time they might receive. We're going to talk about that in a future segment as well. And now it appears we are joined by Connor Howe, who has joined the program. Connor, just first of all, welcome to the show. Appreciate you making time and coming on. Just real quick, before we jump into the next segment, Scott and I have kind of been chatting about some of the high-profile running back prospects. He's done some film study on some of them. And then we also talked about some of the mid-round guys that could be in play for the team. You look at it and you go, what we were saying is, Joe Mixon, the Oklahoma back, might be the only guy that truly is a 3-down guy. A guy that can catch, a guy that can run, maybe even do a little blocking. Obviously, we know the issues. Leonard Fournette, maybe a 2-down guy, but a heck of a 2-down guy. Alvin Kamara, high ceiling, not that much college tape. I don't know. Do you have a preference on some of these guys, especially if the Bengals look at that position in the first couple of rounds?
I'd be surprised if the Bengals take a running back in the first 2 rounds. Actually, I shouldn't say that because they have so many ways they can go this draft. But what I would say is that I expect them to probably take one around where Rex Burkhead was drafted, which I believe he's drafted in the 5th or 6th. I think 5th. But I would say that if the Bengals are looking for, the issue becomes, do they believe in Jeremy Hill? And I think that at this point they do, which means, okay, well, maybe that means the running back need is going to get pushed back a little bit. They still do have a need regardless of whether or not they think Jeremy Hill is the answer, because they need, a 4th running back unless Trey Carson's all of a sudden going to, make the active roster, which I don't think they hope he does. And if he beats someone out, then, congrats to him. But I would say that that for running backs, I would say like 3rd through 5th or 6th maybe. And a guy that I think that the team will be looking at is Deontay Foreman, or however you say that.
We were talking about him. Yeah.
He kind of seems like a similar player to Jeremy Hill, kind of like the whole Leonard Fournette thing, except a couple of rounds back and a little more affordable, which, I'm not going to pretend like I am grinding through this draft breakdown tape. That's just not, who I am. But and props to the people who are into that type of stuff. But personally, I think that they're going to look more for a guy in the Jeremy Hill role, because like I think a lot of fans have come to understand that his time in Cincinnati is ticking down. And hopefully he earns that new contract, but if he doesn't live up to these expectations, what's the point in keeping him around as opposed to just drafting another running back? And hopefully there's a guy who can play special teams in the mix, who also can serve as kind of one of those Jeremy Hill roles, like the 2 down, early down back. But I mean, I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think they could go a lot of different ways.
I agree with you, and just kind of in not that I wasn't paying attention to you, Connor. I definitely was paying attention.
No, you're good.
To what you were saying, buddy. I was just kind of scouring some things about what you were saying. I did come across something interesting via ESPN with Leonard Fournette. He has supposedly weighed in 12 pounds lighter than he did at the NFL scouting combine last month, and that is something that's very interesting because he was heavily criticized for being he claimed it was water weight, quote unquote, but at 228 pounds, he I just read went into the LSU Pro Day. Kind of interesting there for those of you who are Fournette fans. Connor, really kind of the debate that we were having is, do the Bengals want in this draft, do they want a guy that's the 3-down bell cow, the guy, a Le'Veon Bell guy? Or do they want more supplemental running back by committee? Let's do it like the Falcons do. Let's do it like the Patriots do. Let's get a bunch of pretty good guys that are athletic and can do different things. Patriots look at him. They have LeGarrette Blount. He's the hammer. And then obviously you have James White. And, is that the route they want to go? Or do you think they want the guy?
Yeah, I think that's a good question to ask because the game is changing so much in today's NFL, and the Bengals, not that they're resistant to change, but they're slow to change. They do make changes, like things have definitely changed with them, but I think that today's NFL is becoming more and more running back by committee approach, because why not? And if you have a guy like Ezekiel Elliott who can, carry the ball a million times in a season and put together a career year, then sure, good on him, and all the power to him for that. But even the Cowboys, they have Ezekiel Elliott. They run him into the ground last year. They still had Darren McFadden and Alfred Morris in their backfield, which wasn't necessarily the worst, running back trio in the NFL by any means. And so, yeah, like you said, you had a couple of good examples. The Patriots, they had. I was like the biggest skeptic of Rex Burkhead going to the Patriots because even though he fit everything they looked for, why would they add a third guy who does exactly what Deion Lewis and James White do? It just didn't make sense. And Bill Belichick likes Burkhead as a player because he provides. Well, he's a good running back, but he can also add a ton of special teams impact, which I think fans are really undervaluing in Cincinnati. But I think to answer your question in like 45 minutes, I think that it's a kind of a back by committee type of approach. I mean, Jeremy Hill and Gio Bernard have been kind of splitting carries since Jeremy Hill came to the league. Gio Bernard originally was, they could have had Le'Veon Bell. They passed on Bell to take Bernard, not because they thought. I mean, I don't know what their grade was on Bell, but they took Bernard as a top back in that class because he was a complement to Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis. They've always kind of operated by that approach, and so I'd be surprised if they tried to run a guy into the ground unless he has the hot hand. Which in that case, Jeremy Hill 2014, give him every carry you want.
Yep. It's a good point, and one that Scott and I kind of talked about before you got on here. Glad you were able to join us. We're going to move on here in just a second. Again, we want to hear who your choice for running backs would be for the Bengals in the 2017 draft. Should they go in the first couple rounds, those star-studded names either in the SEC or elsewhere? Maybe the troubled Joe Mixon in those first couple rounds. What do you think? You let us know. We're on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can get in touch with us via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. We're on iTunes. We're on SoundCloud. We're on YouTube. We're at Cincy Jungle as well. You can leave comments. Definitely subscribe. Leave us a rating. Leave us some comments. We love to hear back from you. But we do want to hear from you about who you think the Bengals should be looking at running back and when they should be looking at certain prospects at running back. We'd like to hear from you, and we appreciate all of the subscribers so far. Let's move on to the next segment, gentlemen. A recent report that came out this week from Catherine Terrell. I guess it's not really necessarily a report. It's more a report based on past history. Catherine Terrell is the ESPN staff writer who has since replaced Coley Harvey, if you remember that name, with ESPN as the Bengals beat writer, and she does a great job. She kind of put out something today that said big draft class won't deter Bengals from keeping all 11 draft picks. And as we know, the Bengals value the draft. They've made it very well known. They've talked about it even during the midst of free agency. They've got 11 picks, and they have a top 10 pick. They have a high pick in the second round. They've got a lot of ammunition to work with, and we're not going to talk about this necessarily today, but they've also got A.J. McCarron in the pocket to potentially deal for another relatively high pick. So I guess when you look at it, guys, in terms of positional need, in terms of to me, this has a lot of star names in this draft, whether it's, some people believe if the same guy you're going to get at 6, 7, 8 overall is the same guy you could get at 23 overall, maybe. But you've got a lot of high-profile, star, productive college players in this draft. And, if the Bengals get a guy at 9, should they sacrifice some of those later picks and move back up into the late first round? Obviously depends who's there. But it sounds like, according to Catherine Terrell, Scott, the Bengals might not be open to moving up. And granted, they've only done so, I think, 3 times in their entire franchise history. But should they, with the ammunition they have, the star power that's in this draft, the needs that they have coming off of a 6-win season, should they be open to wheeling and dealing more and moving up in this draft?
I think I would probably echo the sentiments of most fans that, yeah, that would be ideal. And the main reason, as you mentioned, they have 11 picks. And if you look at their history, especially the Marvin Lewis era, they don't really utilize when they have that many picks well. A lot of the later picks end up not being guys that make the roster. So in that regard, it'd be much better to package them, get a better player, maybe get a higher second, third, fourth round pick instead of grabbing a guy in the end of the draft who's not going to make the roster. So I went ahead and threw together a list of names of guys the last few years they've drafted and how many picks they had. So last year they had 7 picks. All 7 made the roster, but that was only 7, so 1 per round. And the reason everyone made the roster is a couple guys were on IR, specifically Billings and William Jackson III. Presumably, if they were healthy, someone else may not have made the roster. So let's go back to 2005. They had 9 picks. 3 of them didn't make the active roster, P.J. Dawson, Marcus Hardison, and Mario Alford. Obviously, you could argue, well, it's somewhat injuries. It's also somewhat, guys in the practice squads that didn't make the 53-man roster. 2014, they only had 8 picks, and Lavelle Westbrooks, who was one of the last ones, didn't make it. Before that, 2012 and 2013, they had 10 picks. So we're getting much closer to what they have this year with 11 picks they have. We have Sean Porter, Tanner Hawkinson, Kobe Hamilton, Reed Fragel, and then the year before, Boom Heron and Sean Prater. So you have 6 different guys didn't make the roster, and that's how the 10 picks. So you can say, and most of those guys were the later picks. And the guys in the 6th, 7th, 8th, I guess not 8th round, got it carried away. 6th, 7th rounds. So what you're looking at is, yeah, it's nice to have all those picks. It's nice to bring all those guys in, but they're not guys that are making your roster. They're either making practice squad, eventually disappearing, or they land on another team. And then the year before, 2011, they had 8 picks, and guys like Dante Moak, Robert Sands, Corey Lindsey, and Jay Finley didn't make it. So I think you're ending up with a situation where, okay, now we have 11 picks. Based on their history, not all 11 are going to make the roster. Probably very unlikely that all those 6th and 7th round picks, especially those compensation picks, aren't going to make it. So at that point, I think the preference would be, you do something with them. You package them up for something. Now the question is, can they do that? As you said, they don't have a track record of it. They haven't been very successful when they've traded. Whether up or down, you obviously point to Kajana Carter, Russell Bodine. Neither one were really great. They were both trade ups. They traded down. Obviously not what they're doing in this case, but they did trade down. Ended up with Chris Perry over Steven Jackson. That really didn't work out. They tend to be a team that is afraid of change, including change of spot in the draft order. I think knowing them to hold on to all 11 picks. That being said, I'd prefer they didn't. For the reasons given.
Connor, this is a team again who has rarely traded up to, better their franchise in the draft, and it's kind of ironic because this is a team who, and bless you, by the way, it looks like you sneezed, buddy.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for putting it on mute.
Gotta keep it professional, though. Gotta keep it professional. Be on mute.
I saw you. I'm paying attention, buddy. No, but this is a team, though, who has really, and publicly done so, emphasized their interest in the draft. They want young talent. They want the cheaper talent and talent they can get and lock in for a number of years. And then they can decide if they want to keep them long-term or not. In doing so, and in supposedly valuing the draft, they never move up. When there's a guy, and we've seen it happen so many times. It was, you want to go back to 13 years ago, there's the whole Chris Perry, Steven Jackson thing. They moved back. And then I think a lot of people thought they wanted Steven Jackson, and instead they stayed put, and then they settled for Chris Perry as Steven Jackson went right in front of them. You look back at, I believe it was 2008. They got Keith Rivers, but I think a lot of people thought they wanted Cedric Ellis, a defensive tackle they really wanted, who ended up going to the Saints right in front of them. So to me, I think that this is a team that is already kind of deep enough on the back end. It's more, give me guys who can start now. Give me guys who are role players now. They've got the special teams, maybe kicker aside. They've got depth at corner. They've got depth at safety. Like, give me guys in these first handful of rounds that are wow guys that are going to come out and get snaps immediately. I don't know if you're looking at the end of the 5th round, you're going to get a guy that does that with a compensatory pick. Maybe you can trade it to a team, though, that needs that depth. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think Marvin Lewis, or like whoever it is that we're going to put this this moniker over, that like the Bengals approach, so to speak, whether it's a person or just a team, Marvin Lewis, Duke Tobin, like whatever. It's interesting because they value so highly the abundance of picks that they have. We saw in 2012 when Marvin Jones and George Iloka, both 5th rounders, one of those was a compensatory, I don't remember which one, but they had it. I wish I pulled that up actually while you were talking, but they had, I remember 2012 was the year they had a ton of draft picks. And I think, well, one person could argue that you have so many draft picks that people get iced out because of it. That being said, when you have 11 rookies competing for playing time or even a spot on the roster, it really, something bad. And if you're a guy trying to make the Bengals and you get drafted in the 6th or 7th round this year, there really isn't any guarantee you're going to make the roster. And so these guys, maybe it makes them compete harder. And those guys who are going to make the team aren't people who are going to flame out of the league or eventually going to flame out of the league. I don't really think it matters whether or not it's now or in the future. But I think you are right in the sense that it's interesting to see what exactly are the Bengals going to do with 11 picks. That's a lot of picks. I did a mock draft last night on Mock Draftable, and it was exhausting. if you get one pick and you're like, oh, I don't like this pick, you have to go back and restart the whole thing, and then you're making another 11 picks. And so it's a lot of picks. It's a lot of players. And I think the Bengals, more than probably a lot of other teams, would have these guys not graded as high. Like, I think their grades for these guys aren't high enough that they expect these young players to come in and compete for snaps right away. I mean, so I think when it's all said and done, like, there's pros and cons to it, and I definitely hope the Bengals, like, at least like, get rid of one of those picks, because I don't. It's just, you also have undrafted free agents to look at, and what are you going to do with undrafted free agents when you have 11 players that are used? Like, it just feels like a waste of resources to watch. Like you guys said, like, to watch a 7th round pick not make the roster. It's just like, well, what's happening with that? But I think the point you also made with the whole Bengals valuing having those guys under contract for 4 years is also a pretty big deal. Like, PJ Dawson, for example, I don't know if he made the practice. He was on the active roster at one point. I don't know if he was on the practice squad when he started his career, like Scott said. I'd have to double check that. But
he was. So just to clarify, I think as a rookie he was active roster. His second year,
got demoted.
He got cut, and then had some visits, and then the Bengals brought him back on the practice squad. And I think later in the year they brought him back on the
he's back on the active roster.
So it's been a weird ride for him.
For sure. But I think it's guys like that which make you think, like, if PJ Dawson, by devil's advocate, has a good year this year and comes back, it just would kind of go to show that the Bengals having that, the 4 years, as opposed to when you sign an undrafted free agent, it's like 2 or 3 years, I think, if they're under contract, that you have that extra time to really see whether or not the guys overcome the obstacles he faces or earn that playing time, whatever it may be. It's just a waiting process, and the Bengals are just not a quick team. They don't make quick decisions. I think a lot of people say, they don't just say, like, oh, and we saw with, like, Adam Jones, they didn't rush to a decision with him, and more details come out, and he, not that it makes things better, but the charges get dropped and the felonies dropped, or whatever it was that happened. I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I really read into all that legal drama, but decisions. And so with rookies, they're hesitant to just play them immediately, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. But when it's a picks, it's kind of a hill with 11 picks. But from the Bengals standpoint, I think that they probably like the flexibility it gives them. And from their mindset, if they nail, like, half of those picks or more, like, they're going to be set for the next 5 years.
I get you. And I look at it and I kind of say, okay, yeah, stockpile. You're in a couple of years of transition based on the offseason losses over the past 2 off seasons. But what you've also done is you've relied on the draft to kind of provide a windfall for some of these guys who have left. So now you've got a younger team once again. Yeah, you've got some roster holes to fill, but do you have 11 major roster holes to fill? I kind of look at it and I say, if a team is willing and you see a guy that might not be there 10, 12 picks down the road when you're on the clock, and a guy who could come in and give you immediate snaps and productive immediate snaps, or you think that, I say go for it. I mean, I don't really, especially with how this team treats rookies, I don't really see how this team can sit here and say, okay, yeah, we've got 11 spots up for grabs for rookies, whether it's undrafted free agents, the picks, whatever. I don't know how they're going to have that available, and not only have it available, but have it be where they are productive players on the roster, whether it's a gunner on special teams, another kicker. I mean, whatever the case may be, I just don't see that many teams. Now, I'm not saying mortgage, a 2018 first-round pick to get whoever or anything like that, but, if teams are willing to kind of wheel and deal in the second and third round, you get an extra second-round pick, you get an extra third-round pick by sacrificing someone in the 5th round and maybe a 4th-round pick in 2018. and a guy's there that you like, I don't see why you wouldn't do that instead of letting players fall to you. And granted, everybody likes the best player available strategy, but now you look at it and you go, okay, well, how many cornerbacks do you need on this on this team? I mean, they did the best player available strategy for a long time without moving up, and now they've got a ton of cornerbacks, a lot of the young guys of which are not playing. So just kind of an interesting situation, and I would be surprised if the Bengals moved up because they never do, but with the ability to finally deal compensatory picks for the first time this year and the amount of picks that the Bengals have this year, on the other hand, it really wouldn't surprise me. Scott, any additional thoughts on that?
Sorry, my newest fancy apparatus is a little slow.
You're good. You're good.
But yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, everything what you guys are saying, I agree with. I mean, it makes no sense to hold the 11 picks, and we've kind of gone over the past how miserable their compensatory pick selections have been. I mean, it's not like they're really hitting home runs on that. I mean, in the Marvin Lewis era, I think Bernard Scott is pretty much the only. He was a decent backup, but he was the only really productive pick they've made with a compensatory pick. And if that's all you have to show for after 15 years, then yeah, trade those picks. And not that moving up is necessarily going to get you a better player, but it gives you a better chance. And it's nice to see that Tobin and Marvin maybe have enough sense to say, yeah, let's get a whole lot of picks. I mean, we see the Browns doing it, kind of the shotgun approach. If you make that many picks, you can't go wrong. Well, you still could, because we've seen it how many years where the Browns drafted a quarterback and failed. I mean, you would think at one point one of those guys has to be able to throw a pass in the NFL. So, yeah, I mean, it's nice to have those picks, but me personally, would I rather have 11 picks out of the first 300 or 5 or 6 picks in the first 100? I think I'd rather have the 5 or 6. So yeah. I don't know. And I think you kind of hit on this. Their track record doesn't show it. And I think that's the one interesting thing is this a team that is aggressive enough to make not only a trade, but a trade that makes sense? Not just, we're going to trade for the sake of trading, but we gave up way too much. But instead, hey, we made a trade that made sense. It was a good trade. People were like, yeah, that was a good move. You gave up what you had to, but you got good value. You got a good player. That's the thing I would want to see instead of trading just for the sake of trading and walking away from the draft, without being any better than it would have been with the 11 picks.
Well, Scott, likely that would take a general manager, and I think the way this team is, or the organizational chart of this team is not allowing that. But good thoughts from both of you. We're going to move on. But if you have any additional thoughts on what the Bengals should do with their draft picks, should they move up? Should they stay put? Should they even collect more draft picks, which they have done in the past? And sometimes it's worked out for them. You see the 7th rounders like the Jonathan Fenenes and TJ Hushmanzadas that ended up working out with the team. I get that argument too. I just think personally that this team needs more immediate impact players. That's me. That being said, you can get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI, on email, theobinsider@gmail.com. You can get in touch with us and or download our stuff on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Cincy Jungle. Check us out. Subscribe to our channels. We appreciate it. Gentlemen, it's time for a segment called Fact or Fiction. We've done this, I think, a couple of times in the history of this show, but it's really just kind of one question. And we're going to do this before we maybe take some fan questions here. But it's a nice segue because I'm the king of the segue. You guys know this. I'm the king of the segue. Now, if the Bengals were to maybe trade some of those picks, move back up, get some of these high-profile guys, whether it's running back, offensive line, edge rusher, wide receiver, linebacker, and they get these guys in the first 3 or 4 rounds, guys that seem to have promising careers, seem to have a promising path to get significant snaps with the Bengals in 2017. Do you think that that's going to be the case? And if so, if not, why? I mean, you look at Marvin Lewis, you look at Mike Brown, you look at their fickle nature with some of these young players. What do you think? I'm going to start with you, Connor. What do you think? Do you think we should rely on – I mean, obviously it depends on the players that they choose, but I think we kind of know some of the positions they're looking at. Do you think that they should that we as fans should expect that the Bengals are going to be playing their exciting rookies early?
I mean, no. I think even if you look at the roster right now, and I think we kind of touched on this last week, but like where exactly, and even earlier, like where exactly are the holes that these guys should be filling? Michael Johnson's probably going to play in base packages at defensive end, which, the nickel, there'll probably be 1 or 2 positions on the defensive line, whether it's on D end or D tackle. But I mean, defensive end is really the position where I see like you have to have a guy there, because Michael Johnson and Wallace Gilberry are both getting like, I don't think the Bengals want Wallace Gilberry to be on the roster by August. Like, they would probably hope that he's not on the roster because, well, they cut him last year. Like, they didn't want him on the roster, and then their team started playing bad.
Wait. Let's backtrack.
Yeah.
He was a free agent, and he signed with Detroit. They didn't cut him.
Well,
and then Detroit cut him, and they brought him back mid-season.
Yeah, well, they let him walk because...
Correct. That there you go.
They pretty much made no effort to bring him back last offseason. Basically where I was trying to go. And so Gilberry leaves. They try to plug in Margus Hunt. Hunt didn't, he wasn't terrible, but he wasn't good at all. He was very uninspiring. And Will Clark had a couple of sacks early in the year, and fans were like, oh, this might be exciting. But Will Clark still has like some very serious flaws. For instance, he bites on every single play action pass. And so he bites on play action. Yeah. But it's just, you have like, what do you have at defensive end besides Carlos Dunlap, pretty much is the question. Michael Johnson is like, I think contrary to what a lot of people believe, is still like a capable NFL player. He's probably not like a league average or better starter by any means, but you have those 2 guys and then pretty much nothing. And granted, maybe Marcus Hardison or what's his name, Brandon Thompson come back and make some plays on the interior, but you can't count on that. I mean, both those guys have been hurt, and it's just the Bengals' luck that comp picks like Marcus Hardison end up, or PJ Dawson. They just, everything bad seems to happen to those comp picks, with the one exception of George Iloka. And so, without all that being said, I mean, where are the holes? Like we were just saying. I mean, quarterback's filled. Maybe there's a spot at running back behind Gio Bernard and Jeremy Hill. Maybe there's a spot, as a potentially rotational receiver. Probably not, because you have LaFell, AJ Green, Cody Core, and Tyler Boyd. I mean, maybe there's a guy. I mean, there's roles on special teams. Like Rex Burkhead was a standout. They're going to need another guy who can play wherever he played, which I'd have to go back and look at the tape to figure out where he played once Pierman got back. But and then you have, I mean, you have 4 safeties who can do whatever you want them to do. So that's filled. You have cornerbacks, that's filled. Like to the point where there's really doesn't even seem to be a reason why the Bengals should take a cornerback or a safety at all in the draft besides for special teams prowess. And I mean, maybe you add a linebacker or 2, maybe you add a couple offensive linemen, but there's really not any spots like that are just open for the taking. I mean, and maybe these rookies come in and beat out the guys, but I think, that's what must be frustrating for fans, is like you would want the Bengals to trade up because those guys maybe are the guys who can come in and steal some of those snaps from the guys like Andre Smith or Russell Bodine, who fans believe is on the roster.
Yeah, and I think we were discussing it a little bit before you came on, Connor, in fairness to you. This team seems to have a lot of the starting positions locked up. It's more of, okay, who are the heir apparents? Who are the rotational guys that can still get snaps and or relieve some of those guys who used to be the young up-and-comers themselves, but now are entering their late 20s, early 30s. It's just a matter of this team allowing some of these big-name guys that they get to receive those snaps. And I think as you saw the year go on in 2016 when the team was losing close games and they only won 6 games, I mean, it needs an infusion of young talent, speed, power, all of that stuff that they didn't have. Scott, you and I have been around the block a little bit more than Connor. You can see that the grays in that are starting to come in my goatee here. We've seen Marvin Lewis operate. We've seen Mike Brown operate the Bengals. They prefer the veterans. And Connor mentioned Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson does a lot of good things for this defense. Bats down balls, is good against the run, has the length that they like and the size that they like. He just doesn't get to the passer with regularity. That's one spot. I mean, you look at linebacker, you look at wide receiver, you look at running back. Though they have guys there, I don't know if they have the guy. Do you think that even though that they might draft the guy at a position this year, that he will get significant snaps in 2017?
I'm going to give a very ambiguous yes and no. And the reason I say that is the Bengals tend to get knocked for not playing rookies. And there's a good reason for that. They generally don't play rookies, but there's one very interesting divide between who plays and doesn't play. And if you look at their history, it's typically the offensive rookies will usually get a chance to play. It's the defensive rookies that aren't given that opportunity. And so when we usually think of the rookies, the guys who aren't given the chance, it's always on the defensive side. So what I wanted to do is basically look back over the last 6-7 years at what rookies have got significant playing time. Last year with guys like Billings and William Jackson, but last year the only rookie who really got a substantial chunk of time was Tyler Boyd, the wide receiver, as the Bengals' third receiver, I guess second for a while when A.J. Green was hurt. From 2015, there was really nobody. 2014, there were 2. They're both offensive. Russell Bodine, who's been our starting center ever since then. Hill, who has been our co-starting, I guess, running back since then. You go the year before that, 2013, same thing. It was also a pair of offensive rookies, Tyler Eifert. While he was woefully underutilized, he still did get 400 or 500 receiving yards, and Giovanni Bernard. No one on the defensive side. You go back to 2012, it was Kevin Zeitler who got a ton of starting time, has been the starting right guard until this year. So, going back that stretch, you guys who are drafted, if you're an offensive player who's drafted fairly high, you're probably going to get a chance. If you're a defensive player, probably not. And you have to pretty much go all the way back to 2012 and Vontaze Burfict, who was an undrafted free agent, to find a rookie on the defensive side who really got a chance to play. And if you go back even further, 2011, Dalton, who obviously saw a ton of starting time their first year, 2010, Jermaine Gresham. So you're all the way back to 2009 with Ray Maluga was the last time you had a defensive drafted player who saw playing time. So with that being said, I guess I'm building up with some data to answer your question. If they draft an offensive player early, let's say Leonard Fournette, Corey Davis, Mike Williams, something like that, we're probably going to see a chunk of playing time. If they grab a defensive player, Reuben Foster, Taco, Derek Barnett, whoever, fill in the blank, they probably will not.
I love what you brought up, Scott, because, you look at Vontaze Burfict and you sit here and say, oh, hey, he got significant time early. He's kind of a little bit of an outlier to what we're talking about. Well, a talented and RIP Thomas Howard was in place there and blew out his knee which paved the way for Vontaze Burfict to get a starting job there. Going back to what we talked about earlier about the Bengals sometimes looking at the square peg, round hole type of thing. Ray Maualuga, who has been the middle linebacker for a long time as a rookie, was a strong side linebacker just because they wanted to get him on the field, not necessarily playing to his strengths. So the Bengals do it, Darth Sidious, as you put your hood back on. They just don't do it with regularity. They do play their favorites. I mean, we look back at 2010 when the team thought that they were on the precipice of greatness after a really nice comeback 2009 season. We kind of know how that went. And talented rookies like Carlos Dunlap and Geno Atkins rode the bench and or were relegated to rotational duties because they didn't, quote unquote, practice the right way. They had starters in front of them that were very valuable. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Geno Atkins took a backseat to Tank Johnson in 2010, if you can remember that. So let that one sink in.
I think he had something like 3 sacks his rookie year, but only like 12 tackles because they never put him in. But when he did, all he did was sack the quarterback.
Yep, and Dunlap had an explosive rookie year as well, even though he sat out the first portion of the season because he wasn't doing things in practice that the team liked to see or Marvin Lewis liked to see. And, this is a topic we could spend an entire episode on in terms of, is this a detriment to the team? But that's why we brought this topic up. If the team, if we should expect the team to play some of these young, talented, and potentially star names that have been linked to the team in mock drafts and visits and all of that stuff. So kind of an interesting topic. Check out all of the workouts and visits. You can check out all the news there at Cincy Jungle. This program is on Cincy Jungle as well, whether it be live as we do the show or in segments, the podcast itself. So check it out there. You can check us out on iTunes, on SoundCloud, on YouTube. Subscribe to our channels if you could. Leave us a rating. We'd love to hear back from you. Leave us some feedback. We've already got a number of questions that we're going to try to address quickly as this program goes a little long. Get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI and via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. Gentlemen, we've got a couple of questions, and I'm going to try and condense some of them together from our listeners. And thank you, listeners, for sending these our way, whether it's via Twitter, via YouTube, via Cincy Jungle as we do the show live. A lot of I normally like to single out somebody in the chat room who's, hey, this guy asked this. I saw about 4 people, if not more, talk about Forrest Lamp, the Western Kentucky University guard, who is kind of basically looked at as the top guard in this year's draft, looking at number 9. There's kind of a two-parter to this, but let's kind of start quickly with that. Whether it's number 9, whether it's get a guy at number 9 and trade back into the first round and grab this guy. The Bengals have shown a proclivity to not draft certain positions in the first round. That's changed in recent years. And the 3 positions that we look at, tight end, safety, offensive guard. Obviously, especially tight end and offensive guard has changed quite a bit recently in terms of drafting them high. But I don't know that the team will be looking at this guy, number 1, at number 9. But secondly, moving back into the first round for a guy like that, they re-signed Andre Smith. They've got the 2 guys that they drafted at the top of 2015. Scott, what do you think? What do you think about Forrest Lamp? I guess first of all, at number 9 overall, I think that's really high. Secondly, what do you think about him in the first round in general?
First off, I just want to say that I missed most of what you said. I was busy wiping out the Jedi, and while I was doing that, my connection,
You
I guess, got
you
upset
made
at me for doing such a thing.
You made a quick trip to Coruscant. Is that right?
Yeah. To the Jedi Temple and took care of business. Anyway, to answer your question.
Wait, hold on. Before you go on, I do want to say this is apropos.
Yes.
Your costume is apropos because Star Wars Rogue One came out on Blu-ray and DVD yesterday. So your costume does make some sense. I got you. So go ahead.
Well, and the funny thing is that I don't even have a Blu-ray player, so I wouldn't have even known that. I did like the movie. That being said, speaking of movies, one thing I love about Forest Lamp is the whole thing. It just makes me think of Narnia and the Pevensey kids finding that lamp in the forest when they enter Narnia. But getting back to actual football, I would be highly surprised to see the Bengals draft not even Forest Lamp, but any offensive lineman in the first 4 or 5 picks. And the reason I would say that is I think even though they did lose Whitworth, they did lose Zeitler, I think a lot of people are going crazy. We have to get someone in there, trade back later in the first, even in second, get a lineman. I really don't see them doing that because they just used 2 high picks, just a couple years ago, and I think they still want to see what they have with them. Oh boy, he really hasn't had an offseason yet. I mean, he obviously struggled mightily last year, got benched, was replaced by Eric Winston, but now he's being moved back to the left side, which is what they kind of drafted him to do. He's going to have a whole offseason. All indications are he seems to be doing well, as far as working out. He has a renewed spirit or whatever, kind of like the Andre Smith thing where, hey, I came in a couple years out of shape, but this year, I'm getting close to a contract year. Now I'm going to be the player. So I think they want to see what they have in Abuehi. Now maybe, come Halloween, they might be saying, okay, yeah, this isn't working out. We need a lineman. But I think as of right now, I think they're probably committed to saying, we have our tackles. We have Abuehi. We just need to see what he can do. And on the right side, I think they're going to say, okay, Fisher, we need to see what he can do. We have Andre Smith as kind of that backup plan, who's the guard right now. He can, move out the tackle if they need to. They have Westerman and Trey Hopkins, who could probably play that right guard spot if they have to move Smith to right tackle. They obviously love Bodine for reasons unknown. They just signed TJ Johnson to a contract to back him up for the foreseeable future. You have Bowling locked up. So I think as much as Bengals fans were dismayed by how weak, how porous the line looked at times last year and losing their 2 best players, I think the initial reaction is, yes, we need to draft someone, even be it Forrest Lamp, be it the tackle from Wisconsin or the kid from Alabama. I just don't see, and I could be totally wrong, I don't see them doing that. I see them maybe using one of these 11 picks later in the draft on the lineman, but I'd be very surprised to see a first or second round pick on Lamp or any offensive lineman.
I agree with you. I'm gonna kick it over to Connor here for some additional thoughts. I agree with you though, especially when you see what they didn't pay Kevin Zeitler, a very productive guard, in free agency, allowing him to leave in the division. Again, if you're the Bengals, it's the second time they let a guard do that. Connor, I want to kick it to you not only on Forrest Lamp, admittedly not a guy I've watched a lot of tape on, but also we've been asked, while we're in the topic of offensive linemen, offensive guards, Taylor Moton, the big guy from, I believe it was Western Michigan, who played both right tackle and guard. And I think we all know, for those of us who have followed the Bengals for some time, Paul Alexander loves versatility, loves it. And even if you weren't a great tackle in college, if you played it at an adequate level and you played an outstanding guard, you could be a swing guy in the NFL in his offense. So talk to me a little bit about Forrest Lamp, your thoughts, not only about him being a first-round player and to the Bengals, but Taylor Moton is a guy who could be a good, versatile guy. Just for those who are listening, Taylor Moton is a giant man, 6'5", 320. Did have some very athletic outputs at the combine, 30.5-inch vertical jump and a 4.5-second 20-yard shuttle, which as an offensive lineman you like to see because that shows quick feet, that shows their ability to potentially get to the second level in terms of blocking. Connor, your thoughts?
I have a couple of things. And the first thing I want to say with Scott is not like I'm not trying to take shots or anything, but with the whole subject of weight eating, I think it's worth mentioning because it's interesting that he's working out with Jay Glazer, who is the Fox Sports analyst or sports writer, or whatever. He's working out at Jay Glazer's gym, which is called let me see, the name is Unbreakable Performance Center, which has been kind of, a lot of people have gone in there and tried to, rejuvenate their careers, or, established stars who just enjoy doing it with Jay Glazer because it's really rough. For what it's worth, I mean, like I said, there's people who go there and their careers don't change. Then there's guys like Chris Johnson who, was once a superstar, had a pretty bad down patch, even got shot in the shoulder, and then he comes back, does this unbreakable thing. He said he puked the first 2 days that he did it, and then came back and had that really nice 2015 season. So I wouldn't compare Cedric Ogbuehi's comeback attempt as like an Andre Smith thing, just because, I don't know, that kind of has like negative connotations. But okay, anyways, I'll get to the question, which is Forrest Lamp. I think you guys both kind of hit it in that I don't really see the Bengals taking a guard so high in the draft. I know they took Zeitler, and I think that, I don't know, and I could be wrong, and I don't even know if I've talked about this before, but I think personally that the Bengals taking Zeitler in 2012 was way more just due to the fact that they had a luxury first-round pick that they could pretty much just take a guy and plug him in, because it was a second first-round pick, and Drake Kirkpatrick was kind of their first guy. Could be wrong about that, but I think that it was much more of a luxury pick for them to take a guard that high, and they took the Zeitler probably based off of a need way more so than, they probably could have gotten a different guy if they were going best player available at that point. But in terms of Lamp as a player, I mean, I like him. He's like probably the best guard in the draft. Taylor Moton, what I'll say is, because I'm not going to, again, I'm not going to front and say that or act like I watch all this tape on most of these guys. Like, I don't really watch almost any tape. But Moton, scouting profile, always in my brain there. I think AC said it well. He's kind of a guy that Paul Alexander would like. He's really strong, pretty big, has an issue with punches in the he's an issue punching, but I think the one thing that Bengal fans might not be very enthusiastic to hear is that he has, let's see, what did it say? He can be fooled by twists. So I think a lot of people knock Russell Bodine for getting caught by stunts a lot. I think that those interior players that the Bengals like, the Bengals are way more interested in developing these really strong, big athletes on the interior who have the strength that might not be as technically sound, and then on the outside they seem to like guys who are a little more experienced, NFL ready, so to speak. But I think that with all that being said, they'll probably take a tackle at some point for sure, and or a guard. I don't know where, I don't know who it's going to be, but I think that they're probably not going to stray away from their general profile of those types of guys.
I agree, and they're going to need somebody who has that flexibility, a guy who can maybe play tackle in a pinch, maybe could develop into a starting guard. Maybe it's the center guard thing. I mean, there was talk about that with Christian Westerman last year. Could he be the starting center, especially if Russell Bodine continues to struggle, or could he be the heir apparent to Kevin Zeitler if he were to leave in free agency? Obviously, they think he's not ready for either spot, because Russell Bodine, by all accounts, is the starting center for the Bengals in 2017, and the team re-signed Andre Smith to be the starting right guard by all accounts, and we'll see how that works out. But Christian Westerman was considered to be a second-round talent that fell all the way to the team, I believe, in the 5th round last year. So, kind of an interesting guy. Guys, we're kind of running short on time. We had about 3 or 4 questions we wanted to get to. I apologize to our listeners. We just can't get to them all. We're going to try to get to them all, and we try and get to them all every week, but unfortunately, We're just kind of running long on time, and I don't want to keep both our listeners and our hosts here a long time. Although we all know we could talk Bengals for 2-3 hours if need be. Mike Donahue, and this isn't the last time we're going to mention his name on this program. But this is putting us on the spot a little bit, but he asks via Twitter, again, at BengalsOBI, send us your questions. Who would be your guys' biggest sleeper pick in the 4th round or later that you can see making a real impact? In parentheses, Marvin Jones type of guy this year. Now, if you remember in that 2012 draft, that seemed to be a draft where the team stole a bunch of players much later than they thought they would. Most notably in that 5th round, I believe it was Marvin Jones and George Iloka, or 5th, 6th round. Those guys were at the end of the draft, and they stole them much earlier than many projected. It is so hard to project what players might fall, who might have a poor pro day, that it's so hard to project. But I'm going to put Connor on the spot just because he's a little later tonight. I'm going to put Connor on the spot first. Mid to late round sleeper picks that you think the Bengals not only could draft but could come in and be a productive player over the next couple of years.
I think Devontae Fields is definitely a good cat. I think they visited him the other day. He's an edge player who will probably go.
Connor, I'm going to stop you. You cut out a little bit. Rename the player again.
Okay, Devontae Fields.
Perfect.
He's the guy the Bengals had. He had a little bit of a character red flag. I don't remember what it was that he did, but I'm not going to try to speculate. He seems like a 5th or 6th round guy, maybe 4th round guy, who the Bengals seem at least interested in knowing more about. I don't know if he's going to be a massive steal, but I think he could be a guy the Bengals are looking for in those rounds. I'll give you something. I'm going to leak an idea that I wasn't going to do before I actually wrote the post, but I think the Bengals, more so than a kicker, might draft a punter this year. I don't know who that's going to be, but I think it could be with one of the late comp picks.
Okay.
I don't know. I did a mock last night, and there's a guy named Austin Recco from Idaho who was a punter who can also, in spot duties, play kicker. I think having a 3rd specialist on the roster, while not ideal, is something the Bengals could potentially consider, given that they just carried 3 quarterbacks on the roster last year and might actually do so again this year. I don't know. It's Kevin Huber's time. He's a good punter, and I don't think that he needs to be replaced as soon as possible by any means, but I just don't know how long he's going to be left, or how much time he has left in Cincinnati. And then I'll give you a guy who I think, whether the Bengals take him or not, could be a good player, which is tight end Jonnu Smith out of Florida International. In my mock draft last night, he fell to the Bengals in the Bengals 5th round compensatory pick. He just seems like a really athletic pass catching tight end who I think this year has a pretty underrated tight end class. And he could maybe be, like CJ Uzomah seems like a guy who the Bengals are like, he could be a starter if Tyler Eifert left. He played pretty well in Tyler Eifert's absence, but a guy like Jonnu Smith, whether it's for the Bengals or elsewhere, I feel like could potentially be that Uzomah who, Eifert gets hurt, or the starter gets hurt, and he comes in and makes some plays there.
Okay, good call. I like it. Either positions or specific players you see the Bengals targeting in the middle rounds, late rounds, that a lot of people may not expect them to be looking at?
I am going to cheat. Well, not cheat, but I'm going to take the easy answer and 4th round or later and just say Zane Gonzalez for several reasons. One, because with 11 picks, a lot of people seem to think they are going to take a kicker, even though they did just re-sign Bullock. I think a lot of people are hoping that's just more as an insurance policy in case they don't get a kicker they love in the draft, that they do have someone to fall back on. I don't know where he'll be. If you look at most drafts historically over the last decade or so, if you look at fourth, fifth round, you're probably going to be able to get the top kicker unless someone does something crazy and does a second round pick, like we've seen happen a few times with Mike Nugent, or most recently Robert Aguayo, or the guy from San Diego a few years ago that actually had a good career but seemed to go kind of high. And then Sebastian Janikowski in round 1, which I don't think anyone's taken Zane in round 1. So I think as far as the most impact, because if you're the kicker, you're out there in every game. You're involved in kickoffs. You're hopefully not shanking extra points like we've seen for the last couple of years. So I think that's the easy answer. As far as position, and this really depends on what happens with McCarron and what they think of Driscoll.
You're stealing mine. Go ahead.
Because I won't go too deep. I'll let you go ahead and say what you want to say. The only thing I want to say on this is they seem to be having a lot of meetings with quarterbacks, a lot of private workouts, that currently has 3 on their active roster and has said we are not trading anybody. So either they just want to, hang out with these guys because they think they can say, hey, look, I'm hanging out with a quarterback, I'm cool, or there's something behind the
table at the club, right?
Yeah. So it could be nothing, but it just kind of makes you wonder. You have 3 active roster quarterbacks, and you're entertaining a whole lot of other, and especially they're not, it's not like the Deshaun Watson types. It's or the Mitch Trubisky's. It's more like the guy from Miami or the guy from Texas Tech, the guys that might be their second, third, fourth round if they fall, if the value's there. And it just kind of makes you wonder, placing Andy Dalton. So it kind of makes you wonder what they're doing with McCarron and Driscoll.
I agree with you. Patrick Mahomes is the guy from Texas Tech that you're thinking of. We did get a couple of comments in regards to this question in the YouTube chat. We mentioned Kareem Hunt earlier in the program. Bill Williams in the YouTube chat talked about Kareem Hunt in the 4th as a sleeper for the Bengals. I think that's about where he's slated to go, but I still think that's good value for the guy. I think he is a talented guy that can do a lot of things. So that's one. Waldo, show regular, says Josh Reynolds, who's I believe the Texas A&M wide receiver. I don't think he's a sleeper at this point. I think so many people have him rising up their draft boards. At a minimum is a 3rd-round wide receiver with a great physical skill set that needs to develop into an NFL wide receiver, might sneak into that 2nd round. I don't see him being a sleeper. Like I said, Scott, you kind of stole my thunder a little bit. I think quarterback is one that you don't think they'll look at, but they might. Even if they don't deal McCarron, and they might do the thing where they say, hey, let's go in to training camp and preseason, and who knows what happens. And God forbid a team like something happens to a team like what happened to the Vikings last year when they lost their franchise quarterback in the middle of training camp to a season-ending injury, and all of a sudden teams say, look, let's go knocking for this guy, whether it's AJ McCarron or Jay Cutler, who's still out there right now on the free market. Let's kind of kick the tires on some of these guys and see what can happen. They may say, especially like if you've been tuning into the whole show, if they keep all of their 11 picks, we're kind of playing with house money at this point. Let's take Chad Kelly out of Ole Miss, a guy who didn't have a great pro day. He actually hurt his wrist in throwing, but a guy who kind of seems to be the a high upside type of guy that you can get on the 3rd day of the draft. So kind of depends. I'm not a Jeff Driscoll guy personally. I do like AJ McCarron, but I think I even like the trade possibilities more than I like the player as the backup quarterback for the Bengals. But I do agree with you, Scott. I think that quarterback's going to be a very interesting position to watch this year. We've got other questions, guys. We are just really stretched on time. We can't get to all of them. We're going to try to do this every week and answer more of these. I'm sorry we can't answer more to all of you who have tuned in live. As I mentioned, you can tune in live every week at Cincy Jungle and on YouTube. If you can't tune in live and join us, then you can also get all of our content on both of those platforms. You can go on SoundCloud and get the audio clips of all of our material. You can go on iTunes, do the same. We're also reachable via Twitter at BengalsOBI. We are reachable at via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. Connor, I don't know if you know. First of all, tell them your Twitter handle so people can get in touch with you.
Oh, I've changed like 10 times.
I know.
So right now it's Connor.
It's like Dalton's Pillow, and I mean I don't know where we are now. What is it right now?
YB Connor.
At YB Connor. Okay. Connor, you've been on the show now the past couple of weeks, and we've talked about how Scott needs to get a Twitter account. I don't know if you know, he's got one.
Really?
He's had one.
Congrats.
Well, he's had one, and
very inactive, but it exists.
I know. So what is it, Scott?
It is whatever symbol you use, and then Smackabees.
Underscore.
Whatever symbol you use. Oh my lord!
I think it's the ampersand. No, the A with the circle around it.
Yeah.
At what is it?
Smackabees.
Smackabees.
But it's
SMACKABEES.
Yes, it's the insects bees.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're gonna do a couple. I'm not gonna give you guys final thoughts this week because I'm arbitrarily, unilaterally going to do something here. We're going to do a contest. We're going to see how many followers Scott can get until the next show at Smackabees again. Insects, not, whatever. So at Smackabees. So follow him. Let's see how many followers you get, and we'll talk about it next week.
He's at 5 right now because I just followed him.
5. Okay, wonderful. So let's see how many you get. We'll start at 5.
We'll see if we can double it.
And even if it's a jokingly follow, let's do it for the show. And then the other thing, this is all about embarrassing you guys. I've been watching a lot of Impractical Jokers. I don't know if you've watched that show or not. So I'm about embarrassing you guys and not about myself right now. The other thing, gentlemen, is at YB Connor. Again, via courtesy of Mike Donahue.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, Lord. Apparently, Connor plays the saxophone.
Yeah.
So I think everybody needs to, if you have not followed Connor, at YB Connor, we need to see Connor's saxophone. So, and it's, you know what? If you're thinking like, oh, it's squeaky and gross and weird, it's actually pretty good. It's actually pretty good, but
I haven't played. In my defense, I haven't played since like in at least 3 or 4 years since I played. I played freshman year of college and then I stopped.
Okay, so I had no idea. So thank you to Mike Donahue for that. We will probably need to have you come on this show live and play some saxophone, Connor, because that is unbelievable. And if you guys want to dig up some embarrassing dirt on me, that's fine. Do it. Let's do it next week. But I just kind of thought I'd instead of final thoughts, I thought I'd let the fans and the listeners decide the final thoughts for you both. So, follow them. I'm at CJ Anthony CUI in case you even care. I don't know. But those are our Twitter handles, guys. Thank you so much for coming in. I know both of you have had some relative issues. Connor, both scheduling and Scott with some of the technical stuff. I appreciate you coming in and bringing it as you always do. You guys killed it. I'm so glad you came on tonight.
Scott already has 2 new followers.
Already?
Shout out.
2?
Yep.
All right, there you go. We're talking a minute. So if we get 2 new followers a minute, Scott, I mean, I think you're up there, buddy.
Is that like one of these pyramid schemes where I just need to increase it so much?
Oh gosh.
Yeah, host a Tupperware party at your house or something, dude. But hey, first of all, thanks to you guys and for everything you do for Cincy Jungle and this show. I appreciate you coming on and sacrificing your time to share your insight. Listeners, thank you so much for bringing your questions, your comments, tuning in live in your busy schedules as well. We appreciate it. We will be live every time that we can on this show. I've said 14 times how you can tune into us, so rewind the show and check it out. But we appreciate it, and it's going to be interesting in the next couple of weeks to see what the Bengals do in the draft. We will have some guests both before and after the draft to kind of analyze what's going on with the club. So tune into that, and we look forward to talking with you more about the Bengals. This has been the Orange and Black Insider, the ultimate Bengals fan podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.